Hey, Sarah. Her voice was thinner, frayed thread of its usual bubbly self. Do you have a minute? Chloe, 2 years my junior, had always been the free-spirited one. While I was building a life with David in our suburban Ohio home, meticulously planning our future, Chloe was bouncing from one artistic endeavor to another, from New York to Austin, leaving a trail of half-finished canvases and broken hearts behind her. I loved her fiercely, with the protective, sometimes exasperated love of an older sister, but her life was a turbulent sea compared to my placid lake. Of course, I always have a minute for you, I said, tucking the phone between my shoulder and ear as I matched a pair of David's socks. It all tumbled out then. The freelance graphic design work had dried up. The roommate situation in Chicago had turned toxic. Her savings were gone. There was a tremor in her voice I'd never heard before, a raw vulnerability that stripped away all her bohemian bravado. I don't have anywhere to go, Sarah. Just for a little while. A month or two, tops. Just to get back on my feet. The dread began as a small, cold knot in my stomach. My eyes instinctively scanned our living room, the plush grey sofa David and I had saved for, the framed photos of our wedding and our trips to the Smoky Mountains, the serene, ordered life we had built together. A life that did not include surprise house guests, especially not ones as dynamically chaotic as my sister. But she was family. Blood. Of course you'll come here, I heard myself say, the words feeling both right and terribly wrong. We have the guest room. It's no problem at all. I told David that evening over meatloaf and mashed potatoes. He was quiet for a moment, his fork pushing the food around his plate. David was an engineer, a man of logic and routine. His world was one of precise calculations and predictable outcomes. Chloe was an unpredictable variable. A month or two, he finally said, looking up at me. His blue eyes, usually so clear and certain, were clouded with a reservation I knew all too well. That's what she says. She just needs a soft place to land, David. She's my sister. He nodded slowly, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I know. And we'll help her. It'll be fine, honey. We'll make it work. He was trying to be the good guy, the supportive husband, and I loved him for it. But the dread didn't dissipate, it just coiled a little tighter. My fear wasn't that David would be unwelcoming. My fear, a shameful, silent whisper in the darkest part of my mind, was something else entirely. Chloe arrived a week later in a beat-up sedan filled with boxes and suitcases. She looked thinner, her vibrant red hair a little less vibrant, but she threw her arms around me with a force that felt like a desperate anchor seeking solid ground. Thank you, Sarah. You and David, you're saving my life. David was charming that first night. He helped carry her boxes, made his famous, slightly dry spaghetti carbonara, and listened patiently as Chloe animatedly told stories of her misadventures. He laughed in all the right places, but I saw the way his eyes flickered to the corner where her large, colorful tapestry was leaning against our neutral wall, an alien artifact in our controlled environment. The first week was fine, even nice. We fell into a rhythm. Chloe helped with dinner, we watched movies together, and the house felt fuller, louder in a way that was initially comforting. She was trying so hard to be a good guest, cleaning up after herself, being excessively polite. But then, the subtle shifts began. It started with the little things. David's favorite coffee mug, a sturdy, plain white one, was suddenly replaced on the hook by a delicate, hand-painted ceramic piece Chloe had brought back from Mexico. The living room, once a sanctuary of tidy minimalism, now had a stray sketchbook always on the coffee table, a colorful scarf draped over a chair. The scent of her patchouli and sandalwood incense seeped into the curtains, overlaying the clean linen smell I loved. David didn't complain, not in words, but I saw the tightening of his jaw when he couldn't find the TV remote because Chloe had moved it to drawer. I felt the slight chill in his demeanor when her laughter echoed a little too loudly during his evening news program. And then, the dynamic between them began to change. It was no longer just polite coexistence. Chloe, in her effort to be helpful, started engaging David in ways I never did. Where I would simply let him vent about a difficult project at work, Chloe would probe, asking technical questions, challenging his solutions, offering wildly creative, utterly impractical alternatives. And David, he started to engage back. At first, it was with an air of amused condescension, explaining why her ideas wouldn't work. But soon, their conversations at the dinner table became intense, intellectual duels. They'd talk about philosophy, art, the future of technology, big, abstract concepts that left me, a high school English teacher more concerned with lesson plans and grading essays, feeling grounded and ordinary. I'd sit there, pushing my peas around my plate, watching them, watching him. His eyes would light up in a way I hadn't seen in years. He'd lean forward, animated, his focus entirely on her. The dread I had felt initially was now a constant, humming presence in my veins. This was the fear. Not that he would be rude or resentful. My fear was that he would find her interesting. One Saturday, I came downstairs to find them in the backyard. Chloe was trying to set up a hammock between two trees, and David was holding the other end, laughing as she tangled herself in the ropes. The morning sun caught the silver in his dark hair, and he was looking at her with such open, unguarded amusement that a physical pain lanced through my chest. It was a scene of domestic bliss, but I was an outsider in it. "Need a hand?" I called out, my voice sounding falsely bright. David's head snapped toward me, his smile faltering for just a second. "Oh, hey, honey. No, we've got it. Your sister is determined to turn our backyard into a bohemian retreat. It's about creating a space for relaxation, David," Chloe retorted, grinning. "Something you could use more of, mister. Always on a deadline." He chuckled, and the sound felt like a betrayal. The month or two came and went. Chloe got a part-time job at a local boutique, but there was no more talk of moving out. Our home had become her home, and David's world, once so rigidly defined, had expanded to include her. He started listening to the eclectic, indie music she liked. He came home one day with a new brand of coffee, the kind she preferred. He even suggested we paint the guest room a warmer color, since Chloe was staying for the foreseeable future. He said it was to make her feel more at home, but each of these small changes felt like a tiny erosion of the life we had built. The tension in me built like pressure in a volcano. I started picking fights with David over trivial things, leaving his socks on the floor, forgetting to take out the trash. I was irritable with Chloe, criticizing her mess, her late hours, her general lack of planning. I was becoming the nagging, unpleasant wife, and I could see the confusion in David's eyes, the hurt in Chloe's. I was pushing them away, and in doing so, I was only pushing them closer together. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday. I'd had a particularly draining day at school, dealing with disinterested students and bureaucratic paperwork. All I wanted was a quiet evening, a glass of wine, and the comforting, silent solidarity of my husband. I walked through the front door, shaking the rain from my coat, and stopped. The house was filled with the sound of jazz, Chloe's music, and then I heard their voices, not from the living room, but from the kitchen. They were laughing, a deep, shared, intimate laughter that stopped me in my tracks. I crept closer, standing in the shadow of the hallway. They were at the kitchen island, flour dusting the counter and their clothes. They were baking. David, who considered boiling water a culinary achievement, was baking. "No, you have to fold it in gently, like this," Chloe was saying, her hand guiding his over the bowl. Her fingers were on top of his. They stood there, shoulder to shoulder, her head tilted back in laughter at his clumsy attempt. "I don't know why we're doing this," David said, but he was smiling, a real, unforced smile that reached his eyes. "Because, you Philistine, sometimes you have to make a mess to make something beautiful," she said, her voice soft and teasing. I saw him look at her then. It wasn't the look of a brother-in-law. It was a look of profound fascination, of admiration. It was the look he used to give me when we were first dating, when everything about me was new and captivating. The world tilted. The hum of dread became a deafening roar. My worst fear, the one I had been too ashamed to even fully articulate to myself, was staring me in the face. My husband was falling in love with my sister. I must have made a sound, because they both turned. The moment shattered. "Sarah, you're home," Chloe said, her voice a little too high. She quickly pulled her hand away from David's. David's smile vanished, replaced by a guilty flush. "Hey, honey, we're attempting a souffle." It was Chloe's idea. I couldn't speak. I just looked from his flour-dusted face to hers, my heart a shattered piece of glass in my chest. I turned and walked away, ignoring David's calls, and went straight to our bedroom, locking the door behind me. The confrontation happened later that night, after Chloe had discreetly retreated to her room. David knocked softly. "Sarah, can we talk?" I was sitting on the bed, numb and empty. I didn't answer. He knocked again, then used his key to open the door. He stood there, looking weary and defensive. "What was that about?" he asked. "What was that, David?" My voice was quiet, dangerously calm. "That looked like a scene from a romantic comedy. You and my sister, baking together." "Since when do you bake?" "It was just something to do," he said, running a hand through his hair. "You've been so distant lately," and Chloe was just trying to cheer me up. "Cheer you up?" I let out a bitter laugh. "From what?" "The terrible burden of your stable life, the crushing boredom of your wife." "That's not fair," Sarah. Isn't it? I stood up, the dam of my composure finally breaking. You listen to her music now. You drink her coffee. You have these deep, intellectual conversations that I can't even follow. You look at her like she's the most fascinating creature you've ever seen. What's next, David? Are you going to start wearing berets and moving to a loft in Paris with her? He was silent for a long moment, and that silence was more terrifying than any denial. She's just different, Sarah, he finally said, his voice low. She sees the world in a way I'd forgotten existed. It's stimulating. The word hung in the air between us, ugly and final. Stimulating. I was stable. I was reliable. I was home. She was stimulation. Get out, I whispered, my voice cracking. Sarah, get out, I screamed, the sound raw and guttural. He left, closing the door softly behind him. I collapsed onto the bed, the sobs finally racking my body. My marriage, the foundation of my entire adult life, was crumbling, and the wrecking ball was my own sister. The next few days were an ice age. David and I moved around the house like ghosts, speaking only in clipped, necessary phrases. Chloe tiptoed around us, her face pale with anxiety and guilt. The vibrant energy she had brought into the house was gone, replaced by a heavy, miserable silence. I knew I couldn't live like this. I had to talk to Chloe. I found her in the guest room, packing a suitcase. I'm leaving, she said before I could speak. Her eyes were red-rimmed. I've been looking at apartments online. I can stay in a motel for a while. I never wanted to cause this, Sarah. I'm so sorry. Seeing her pack, hearing the defeat in her voice, didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. It just made me sad. Stop, I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. We need to talk. And so we did. For the first time since she'd arrived, we had a real, raw, sisterly conversation, stripped of all pretense. I told her about my fear, my jealousy, the slow, agonizing feeling of watching my husband be captivated by her. I didn't accuse her, I just laid my heart bare. Chloe cried. She told me she was just so lonely, and David was so smart and stable, and she'd gotten caught up in the attention. She swore on our parents' graves that nothing physical had ever happened, and I believed her. But she admitted that an emotional line had been crossed, a line of intimacy and dependency that was just as damaging. He's not in love with me, Sarah, she said, wiping her tears. I think he's in love with the idea of me, with the chaos. It's a vacation from himself. But a vacation isn't a life. You are his life. Her words struck a chord. Was that it? Was David, the man of structure and rules, simply having a midlife crisis, and my free-spirited sister was the perfect catalyst? That left one final conversation, the one with my husband. I asked him to go for a drive with me. We ended up at the park where he had proposed 10 years earlier. We sat on a bench, the autumn leaves swirling around our feet. I can't live with this distance, David, I began, my hands clenched in my lap. I need to know what is happening. I need the truth. David stared out at the pond for a long time, his shoulders slumped. The truth is, I don't know what's happening to me, he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. When Chloe moved in, it was like a whirlwind. She made me question everything. My job, my routines, my choices. She made me feel young again. And you're right, I found it stimulating. I found her stimulating. Each word was a fresh cut, but I forced myself to stay quiet, to let him finish. But these last few days, with you not talking to me, with this coldness in the house, Sarah, it's been hell. It's made me realize that stimulation isn't happiness. Chaos is exciting for a day, but it's exhausting for a lifetime. He finally turned to look at me, his eyes filled with tears. You are my happiness. You are my peace. You are the home I come back to. And I have been so stupid. I got lost, and I'm sorry. I am so terribly sorry. He broke down then, sobbing into his hands. And in that moment, the dread that had been my constant companion for months finally, miraculously, began to dissolve. It wasn't replaced by instant forgiveness or forgetfulness, but by a fragile, tentative hope. The path back wasn't easy. Chloe moved out the following week into a small apartment across town. The first few months were hard. There was counseling, there were tearful late-night conversations, there was a lot of rebuilding of trust. David had to prove, through 1,000 small, consistent actions, that I was his home. And I had to learn to open up again, to share my own fears and dreams, to be not just his safe harbor but also his adventure. Chloe and I are healing, too. It's slow and careful, but the bond of sisterhood is resilient. She's doing better, standing on her own 2 feet. We see her for dinner sometimes, and the dynamic is different now, healthier, with clearer boundaries. My husband did exactly what I feared. He formed a deep, emotional connection with another woman, a connection that threatened the very core of our marriage. But in doing so, in almost losing everything, we were forced to look at what we had, and what we almost threw away. Our marriage is different now. It's not the perfectly ordered, serene life I once cherished. It's more honest, more communicative, and in a strange way, stronger. We learned that even the strongest foundations need to be checked for cracks, and that sometimes, the greatest danger isn't the storm from the outside, but the quiet decay from within. Our story didn't end in the tragedy I feared. It evolved into a harder one, more deeply appreciated version of happily ever after.